Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples across Canada. We're grateful to live, work, and learn on these lands, which have been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We recognize the enduring relationship between the Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories and the importance of honoring and respecting the histories, cultures, and contributions of all Indigenous peoples. My name is Michelle Goodfellow, and I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager for the PKD Foundation of Canada, which is the only national organization solely dedicated to fighting PKD through research, awareness and advocacy, and education and support. This week, April 21st to 25th, 2025, is National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week. Our topic tonight is organ donation and transplant advocacy in Canada. Every day, people in Canada wait for a life-changing kidney transplant, but not everyone gets the chance. Living donors can make an incredible difference in increasing the supply of available organs, but there can be big barriers standing in the way. Why is it still so hard for patients to find a match? What challenges do donors face before and after surgery? And most importantly, what can we do to fix this? Tonight, we'll hear from Kris Woods, a living kidney donor and the provincial director of the Canadian Transplant Association for the Maritimes, as well as Joanna MacLeod, the PKD patient who received Kris's kidney. Together, they'll be sharing a powerful story, as well as taking us on a deep dive into the urgent issues facing kidney patients and organ donors, especially in Atlantic Canada, where Kris is located. If you're wondering how to take action and make real impact for kidney patients, this webinar is for you, whether you're a patient, a family member, a potential donor, or someone who simply wants to push for change. We hope you'll leave with practical steps to get involved. We will be leaving time for a live question and answer session after the discussion, so feel free to leave your questions either in the Q&A area or in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll try to address your questions at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. I'll now introduce our presenters. Christopher Woods was a living kidney donor to his friend Joanna in 2018. Since the donation, he has been active in his local community, engaging others in conversation about the benefits of organ donation and the positive impact of choosing a donor, that choosing to be a donor can have on so many others. He lives in Nova Scotia, and he's currently the provincial director for the Canadian Transplant Association in Nova Scotia and the interim director in PEI in New Brunswick. Joanna is a PKD patient living in Ontario. She received her living kidney donation from Kris. So welcome, Kris and Joanna. And we're going to start, we will be hearing Kris and Joanna's transplant story, but we're going to start on, I'll have Kris share a little bit about the work that he does with the Canadian Transplant Association and what role the CTA plays in transplant in Canada, and more particularly, what they help do with in terms of advocacy and support for transplants. So, Kris, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. We're glad to have you. So tell me about the CTA. What is it? What do they do in general? And maybe what specifically have you been involved in working as a provincial director in the Maritimes?
Yeah. So the Canadian Transplant Association, we are a national organization, and we're made up of a national board of directors, and there's an executive team. And then a part of that national board is area chapters, our provincial directors. And in each province, in each area, we have small committees. So if you're a part of Alberta, if you're a part of Quebec, if you're part of the Maritimes, there's a little chapter for the Canadian Transplant Association that you can get involved in. We are a organization founded in 1987, and our primary focus and mission is around supporting the transplant community post-transplant. So we're about what are the things you can do to stay healthy? What are the things you can do to make sure that, the organs you've received are being well taken care of? So we support healthy, active lifestyles. We have information available on our websites. We help get involved with webinars and education. And you may recognize some of our national initiatives. We are the presenting partner for Green Shirt Day. So Green Shirt Day just happened. It was April 7th. And for those who may not be aware, Green Shirt Day stems from the Humboldt Broncos bus accident, where unfortunately we lost a lot of young players. And on April 7th, Logan Boulet unfortunately passed, and his family made a decision to donate his organs. And it started a large national movement across the country that today is known as the Logan Boulet effect. So we support Green Shirt Day in raising awareness around Canada on the importance and significance of organ donation, why it's important, how it impacts members in our community. And we are also the hosts of the Canadian Transplant Games. So last year in 2024, we had the Transplant Games in Ottawa, and that is the largest that we are aware of organ donation awareness event in the country. And what that is it brings people together from all across Canada and internationally. We had athletes from Australia, and from the United States and from other parts of the world come together for an event fostered on togetherness, on community, and on sports. So it's a demonstration of resiliency and a place where community can form, where friendships can establish and develop, and where we can really lean on one another's for support. Our next transplant games is going to be in Sherbrooke, Quebec. So that will happen July 5th to 10th in 2026. So if you are a recipient, if you're a donor, if you're a family member of a donor or a deceased donor, you're welcome to participate and get involved. We'll also be looking for volunteers, and there'll be more information that'll come out about that as we move forward with planning. But yeah, that's just a little information about the Transplant Association.
And how did you get involved with them? And how did you get to be doing the work that you're doing for them in the Maritimes?
So when Joanna and I donated, we did some convalescing together. And we were looking up some information about, well, what does it mean to have gone through this process? And what does it mean now that we're a recipient and a donor? So we did some research and we were looking for some organizations, and that's kind of when we found the CTA. We were looking for a place of community, a place where we could get some information. So we both reached out to the CTA at that time. But it really wasn't until I came back to Nova Scotia that I did a little bit more research into what's available for me out here on the East Coast. So I got connected with the then provincial director. Um, his name was Mark, and he made me aware that, in the Maritimes, there's some events that they do. One is the Transplant Trot, and that's actually another national event that local chapters host to raise funds for the Transplant Association so that we can support our games, but also local opportunities for people to get together and connect. So I was really looking kind of for a place of community around that experience that I had, people who might have a similar story or an experience. And I also just really wanted to find a place where we could have more conversations about organ donation, and the importance and the impact it has on, those who need those life-saving organs, and how others can get involved in that process. So that's kind of why I reached out. And that was in 2018. And for the last couple of years now, I've been fortunate enough to be the provincial director here in Nova Scotia, and we're doing some work to get some numbers increased in New Brunswick and hopefully into PEI soon.
Thank you. Sorry, Joanna, were you going to say something?
No, it's good.
No. Okay. Um, So tell me a little bit more. You've said that the CTA really is focused on post-transplant. Is there anything else that they do in terms of transplant or donation advocacy, or is it really focused more on the well-being of people post-transplant?
So, our primary mission to date has really been focused around supporting post-transplant recipients, but we have a desire and an interest to evolve. We have a national platform that people are familiar with. So people know of the Canadian Transplant Association and our work with Green Shirt Day and our work with the Canadian Transplant Games. So we have an interest and what I've heard, a need to do some more advocacy. So in the Maritimes, we've actually taken an active step in doing so. Recently, we've been really fortunate in being able to have had conversations with the province of Nova Scotia around addressing some of the inequalities and systemic barriers that are in front of organ donation today. And it's really important, I feel, that we're able to have those conversations with our policymakers and our decision makers, and that information is coming from those who are impacted, from living donors, from those who are on the transplant list, from those who have received those life-saving organs. I think there's only so much information that can inform policy and decision making when it's coming not from the people who are impacted by those decisions. I think we have an active role um, to share our voice and to be heard, to let people know what our needs are and how we can be supported. So, hearing those things and knowing that that's a need across the province, but also across Canada, it's something that I'm really passionate about bringing the CTA in a little bit more.
We'll probably talk a little bit later today about how, if people are wanting to get involved with the various work that the CTA does, how they can do that. But let's switch right now and talk a little bit about the personal story that you and Joanna share. And we'll bring Joanna into the conversation. Joanna, let's start by talking about what you have PKD, but let's talk about your PKD journey leading up to um, realizing that you needed to have a transplant.
Yeah, sure. Um, Thank you again for having us, Michelle. It's a joy to be able to talk about our story and yeah, encourage anybody that can be from our story. It's awesome. So yeah, I found out that I had PKD at a young age. My parents knew from the time I was 4. And I'm living here in Ontario, so I would have to go once a year to go see how my kidneys were doing. And we were told right away that I would need to have a transplant eventually. And we didn't really believe it, actually. um, um, I come from a Christian family, and I think we just kind of trusted God that that might never happen. If it does, we'll deal with it then, you know. But every year I'd go to these appointments, and basically it was like, get your blood work done, do your little urine test, and not yet, but you're going to need a transplant. Yeah. And so eventually, when I was 18, I had to leave Toronto Sick Kids, which is where the specialist was. And he said, basically, if you live to 20, write me and I'll write a book about you, because you're going to need that transplant. So anyways, I just kind of lived my life as if I'm completely healthy, and my kidneys looked like really horrible. I was used to having ultrasounds they would bring other people in to come look at how horrible they looked. And, but they functioned fine, totally fine. So I just didn't live like a sick person. I just didn't really believe that it would happen to me, but eventually it did. And we know that like once you're kind of in end stage renal failure, you start getting pretty tired, and there's a lot of different symptoms that come. And so I was working at a place called L'Arche, which is group homes for people with disabilities. But it's a little different in that we kind of create homes that are more like family in a way. Everybody has a role, and we can learn from everybody, and we have that mutuality of like people, caregivers, and also people with disabilities, or the office people compared to the people with hands-on, and so I had been working there for a while, and that's how I met Kris. I met him actually at another organization, and I told him he should join L'Arche. And
It's all because of you, Joanna.
and then and also at that workplace, we have live-in and live-out workers. So I was a live-in worker, and so Kris ended up being a live-in as well, and we lived together in the same home. I was the house leader, and he was one of the assistants there, and we had the privilege of opening a home together for people with disabilities. It was really fun, and we had amazing ups and downs in life, but anyways, he moved out to Nova Scotia and joined L'Arche in Nova Scotia, and I was just working away here, and then I started getting symptoms, and that was in 2016, I think, and I had to go on sick leave by 2017. No, yeah, 2017, and so I had to actually start telling people that I was sick, and people that knew me for decades had no idea that I had any kidney problem whatsoever. And actually, some people were even hurt that I hadn't told them. But it was so not a part of my life at all that eventually I had to tell people. So I phoned Kris, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going on a sick leave, and I'm going to actually, my kidneys are bad enough that I'm going to need a transplant or end up going on dialysis. And so, yeah, that's kind of the workup to what happened. And then Kris right away was like, well, okay, you can have mine. No problem. It's mine. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, of course, which was really wild. And in my experience, I do know that this isn't everybody's experience, but I also had other really, really close friends that also offered to donate. And I was so blessed that way. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, that's amazing, Kris. If you're, a match, that would be incredible. But also, there are other people I'm trying to see as well. And we ended up having lots of tests and everything. And there ended up being 2 people that were very committed to trying. And Kris, you were one of them. And there was so many tests, and both people were so committed and going all through all the testing, and they both ended up being a perfect match, which is crazy. The other person that was my donor was my boss, in my organization. So it was like my boss and then also an assistant that I was
You were my
his
boss.
boss. So it was kind of funny that way. But it was all workplace people. It wasn't family, although we felt like family, right? So yeah, you wanna step in with your side there, Kris?
Sure. Yeah, no idea Joanna was sick. It was a complete shock and a surprise. So L'Arche is unique in that, as Joanna said, we have people with disabilities who live with people without disabilities, and we create home together. In L'Arche, we often talk about the experiences and the relationships we form between those with disabilities and those without. But for me, the relationships I formed with my coworkers and my assistants were just as valuable. Joanna really did become a very close person in my life. And although, a change happened for me and I moved to Nova Scotia, Joanna and I kept in contact. Um, we would check in quite regularly. But at the time, Joanna never did share with me that she wasn't feeling well, because what I've come to learn now is Joanna thought she was okay, thought she was fine. Why share information with someone when you don't think it's necessary to share? Um, and I had always kind of been involved in blood donation. It's something I was really passionate about from a young age. I started donating blood in high school. And, when you go through Canadian Blood Services and you're there donating blood, there's a lot of information there around organ donation, and tissue banks and stem cell program. So, as you're sitting there reading and you gotta wait and you're sitting there with your snacks and your cookies and your juice, you just read those materials, and I kind of became a little aware around what organ donation was, but never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that would be a reality for me. Um, but it also wasn't really something that I thought was scary. I thought, okay, that's an interesting thing, but really didn't pay a lot of attention to it until Joanna said, "I'm sick and I need a kidney." Um, and I don't know, I don't really know what it was, about that moment, about the relationship Joanna and I had, but I just really felt compelled in that moment to say, "You could have mine." There wasn't really a lot of hesitation in that thought. It was, in my mind, just the right thing to do and the right thing to say in that moment. And of course, that was before we had even had conversations about the practical elements of it. I lived on the East Coast. I lived 2,000 kilometers away from Joanna. Like, how are we going to do this? Because there's so much involved in that. We have cross-match testing that needs to be done. There's ECGs, there's EKGs, there's ultrasounds, there's blood work. You got to meet with a psychologist. You got to meet with, the surgical team, a transplant coordinator. Um, so it's like, how was the next question? I think, how are we going to make this work? And Joanna had information about the multi-organ transplant program in London. We did the transplant at the London Health Science Centre, and I sent them an email, and I said, I have a friend who is really in need of a transplant, and I'm interested in stepping forward to seeing how we can proceed with me being tested. And they were fantastic. You know, um, it was quite unique in the circumstances. So, me being in Nova Scotia, Joanna being in London, my family's from London. So there was a lot of reason for me to go back to London. Um, so I did travel back to London a few times, mostly just to meet with family, to spend some time with the large community there. And it was so interesting and unique in that, in the process of going through these testing, and there were multiple rounds of testing that needed to happen. Divine intervention, um, you know, every instance where I needed to be in London for testing, I was in London for testing. It wasn't planned in
Already coming.
advance. Huh?
You were already coming or
I
already
was
here.
already coming. Like, either I got a message from the transplant unit saying, "Okay, Kris, we need you to come in for more testing," or I was in London once when I got a phone call saying we need you in for the next round of testing, and I was there. I was in London. There were three different instances where I needed to be in London for testing, and I was there. I was in Ontario in all those moments when I needed to go to the hospital to be tested. So it was just so unique and bizarre that in all those moments the timing lined up so well that we could still proceed through this process, even though I lived so far away. Um, and and we did the testing. And I think something I hear from a lot of people afterwards is like, oh, didn't you find that hard, and didn't you find that inconvenient? And of course, some of the tests are hard. And yeah, it wasn't really, a convenience to go to the hospital and do all these testing, but the benefit, the idea of having the capacity to help someone for, I don't know, for me, it felt like such a little sacrifice. I have two perfectly operational kidneys, and I really only need one to live my life well. And here's someone in front of me whose kidneys are failing her, and I have the opportunity and capacity to do something about that. And when I talk about the relationship that Joanna and I had, we really did become like family when we were living together at L'Arche, and it just really just made a lot of sense that you know I have something and I can help someone. So I'm going to do my best to do that. And we did, you know. Um yeah, I really don't know what else to say about that other than we did it. And um and
Uh,
it was huh?
I think what's interesting as the testing was happening, it was long. It was over a year. It
Mhm.
was hard. I was getting more and more sick. They kept saying I had to wait longer and longer because they want you to wait as long as possible on your functioning kidney, especially because I was still pretty young compared to most transplant recipients. And, you know, often a kidney doesn't last people's lifetime, although mine will, knock on wood. But, but yeah, like, it was hard. It was a lot of being sick, a lot of being sick. And also it was really crazy because we had this other friend that both of us were friends with that was doing testing at the same time. Uh, and Kris, you even said you saw her sometimes at the hospital the same day getting
There
tested.
was a time, yeah, there was a moment when I was leaving as they were coming in to do their testing. And when Joanna and I tell the story about our transplant journey, it's really not just her and I stories. Like this other person is a part of our story. And even though they were not able to donate their kidney to Joanna, Joanna sparked a process for that person to be able to go on and donate anonymously. So that person continued through the donation process, and they were the link in a chain donation that occurred. So this whole process and experience was something so remarkable for all of us involved. Um, oh, and we have to tell the story about how we found out. So I was in London. Um, Again, I was in London and I had already done all the testing, but I was in London visiting L'Arche, and a group from L'Arche in Nova Scotia visited L'Arche in Ontario, so we were there. And on the last day, I did. I was there. The last day I was there, I got a phone call from the transplant coordinator saying that the surgeons had made a decision and they wanted to proceed with my kidney. Um, so it was so amazing in that, um, I was able to tell Joanna in person. And what we had done was I had made contact with the other person who was stepping forward to donate. They had been informed that they weren't going to proceed with her donation. But the both of us came over to the L'Arche home and Joanna had already had plans to come over, and she didn't know. She didn't know that we had this news to share with her. So she showed up, and you know, it was like, "Hey, Joanna, can I talk to you for a moment?" So it had been raining all day, but the rain had just let up. So we went outside, and there was a little gazebo that we could go and sit in. So we went outside and we sat in this gazebo, and both myself and the other donor were able to tell Joanna that she was going to get a kidney. Yeah. And it was just such a remarkable moment because it had just rained. There was this massive rainbow over us at the time. I don't know. You remember,
This
Joanna?
rainbow
This
came.
huge
It was
rainbow over
so
the gazebo.
crazy. We're like all
Yeah.
bawling. It
Yeah.
was ridiculous.
It was remarkable, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then came time for the transplant, you know.
Do
And it
do
was
you want me,
happening.
before we start talking about the transplant, do you want me to put up the first picture that you've
Oh,
shared with
sure. Yeah,
us?
that would be great. We have some photos for you guys. So what happened was, I had to make my way from Nova Scotia to Ontario. And there was a lot of questions around those practical elements. I had to take time off work, what supports were available for me to be able to do so. I had to have conversations with my employer around taking time off of work. We had to set up EI. And we're really fortunate that we were able to take advantage of a program through the government of Ontario. There's a program called Prelod, which provides interprovincial funding for donors. So me being in Nova Scotia was not a barrier to me being able to donate to someone in Ontario. Joanna had found a donor outside of Ontario, and the government of Ontario helped support me to come back to Ontario to make that donation happen. There was a bridging funding available, so that time where I was off work and not receiving EI and organ donation, I was eligible to go on EI during my recovery time. That they provided supports. They provided supports for my travel. They reimbursed me my mileage. They paid for my hotels to get back and forth. They paid for my meals. So it was a terrific program through Trillium that I was able to benefit from some fundings to allow me to be able to, you know, make that decision to donate without a huge financial impact on that decision for myself. So we get to Ontario. It's
So,
you know,
yeah, that we were gearing up for the transplant.
yeah.
This picture is before the transplant, right before surgery. And we, you know, when you're that sick, it can get pretty dark and hard, you know. But we try to keep it light and find things to laugh about. And remember our song, Kris? We ended up getting a song about four days before the surgeries. And it was the final countdown, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
we we were blasting it in the car many times. And
yeah. And even on the morning of in the hospital, I remember we were putting on our phone as we were walking into the hospital.
in the
It's the
hospital.
final countdown.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, that was us before surgery. And Kris's surgery was about 4 hours, and then mine, I had a double nephrectomy. I had my original kidneys removed because the polycystic disease had made them really, really big, and I had been in a lot of pain. So my surgery was 8.5 hours. Also because Kris's kidney was very large, so they had a hard time fitting it properly in me. But yeah, it was successful. This picture is, I think, a day later when Kris was well enough to go from a different floor and come see me for the first time. So both of us were a wreck, but it was pretty emotional. It was pretty amazing. It's wild, actually. Yeah.
yeah. it was such a remarkable experience, you know. And all of it, I would do it again. You know, like there's so many things about this experience for me that has been rewarding for for myself, you know. Um, and I really didn't expect that, you know. Um, but it's just there's just something remarkable about being on the other side of the transplant and being able to sit here and have a conversation with Joanna today, you know. That's just it makes it all worth it, you know.
And
Yeah.
also, our other friend that wanted to be a donor, she was actually she was really upset that she wasn't picked. Like, she was happy for me and Kris, but she also felt like, oh, but because she had been through all the testing, she did decide a few years later to donate anonymously to a chain of, she was the beginning of a chain of couples. And she went into the hospital during COVID. So her husband drove her to the hospital at like 5 a.m, and she had to go in by herself. So a couple of us actually went outside the hospital with our masks and big signs, and she could bring the sign into the hospital with her to be able to put it up in her room and stuff. So she also was able to donate. So that affected many other people as well. So yeah, that's incredible too.
It's
Yeah.
always a great thing. And I think sometimes people don't realize is that they think, oh, if I'm not a match for the person I want to donate to, that's it. That's too bad. But we do have the kidney paired donation program, which we've actually done a webinar on about a year ago, where you can donate to someone else who needs a kidney, and then through the chain, everyone ends up getting a donation. And the people who are the like the unicorns, the anonymous donors who kind of started all off are the real heroes too, because they don't know necessarily, they may never know who they donated their kidney to, but they saved several lives, not just one life by doing that.
It's awesome. I've also heard of like, I've heard of a grandmother anonymously donating to somebody in honor of her grandchild who most likely would need a kidney later in life when she might not be well enough to do so, which is also really cool, so that her
Mhm.
granddaughter would be higher on the list when it's time. Yeah.
Mhm.
Speaking of donating, Kris, did you know before you found out Joanna needed a kidney, did you know that people could donate a kidney while they're still alive? Did you know that we only needed one kidney to live on?
I did, you know, I learned that through some of the information I received when I was donating blood. Um, I believe my facts are correct on this, but I was really interested in knowing that we really did a lot of learning about that you could, you know, live with during the war, you know, when soldiers were being injured and they were losing kidneys and they were going on to live very healthy, you know, lives afterwards. I think that's fascinating, you know, that and something so terrible, we have to discover something so amazing about how we operate and function as humans that, you know, it led to being able to make you know life-saving decisions like this. I'm always interested in the history of all those things, so I didn't know that and I was excited to learn that. Yeah.
Very
I also really didn't have a lot of understanding of what it would mean to be a living donor, you know, like obviously I knew there was going to be a surgery, but what kind of surgery, you know, and how does that impact my life post-transplant? What are the barriers in front of me? That was a lot of information that I didn't have that I had to learn, you know. And there was some information available from the multi-organ transplant program. You know, I had a transplant coordinator that was separate from Joanna's. And in this whole process, you know, they always gave me the option to say, you know, Kris, if at any point you want to step back, you don't want to proceed, that's completely okay. Up until the moment of transplant, I always had the option to step away from the program. And I was always provided the option to have a medical out, you know. So if at any point during the procedure I decided that, you know, maybe this isn't really the best decision I could be making for myself, the multi-organ transplant program would have provided Joanna's team information that would have said, you know, for medical purposes, Kris is no longer able to proceed through the donation. And that's all the information they would have provided to Joanna, you know. But fortunately, we were able to proceed. And I, you know, some things that impact my life today post-transplant is that I really should avoid NSAIDs, you know, so those are those non-steroidal medications, so ibuprofen, Advil, um, naproxen, you know, those medications, only because I have one kidney now, you know, and there's a link between those medications and kidney disease, so they really want me to avoid taking those medications. So since transplant, I've really limited myself to Tylenol if I'm experiencing like a headache or a fever. They also recommend that I be very mindful of my alcohol intake, which is, you know, for obvious reasons. You have one kidney. And we know a lot of alcohol gets processed through the liver, but they just want to make sure that, you know, that I'm taking care of my only remaining kidney. And those are really big decisions that the team makes with regards to them wanting to proceed with me is, you know, will I be able to adapt my lifestyles to accommodate the fact that I really only have, you know, one kidney now. um, and for me that wasn't a really big life change. I didn't consume alcohol very often, so that's something that really didn't impact my life. Contact sports, they said, you know, if I played rugby, stop. They don't want to risk my one kidney getting damaged. But really, other than that, my life has been completely unchanged. You know, I've really not noticed any difference in my health or well-being as a result of this organ donation. Um, and I'm actually quite surprised by that. You know, I had really imagined that I would feel, I don't know, lethargic or more fatigued than I do, you know, or, you know, I don't know, anything that might stem from having only one kidney. But to be honest, I've been great. You know, like the impact has been minor on me. The only really inconvenience was the donation, you know, and the convalescence recovering from surgery. And my life has been normal, absolutely, since then. So, you know, for a few months of inconvenience, so Joanna can, you know, have many more years. It's absolutely worth it, 100%.
Um, Kris, can you tell me a bit? I know when we were talking before we were planning this event, after you did the donation and after you had recovered, did you feel like there was, uh, I've heard another donor say that they kind of felt almost abandoned, or that they didn't quite know their place, I guess, or what was next. They expected, you know, they'd been leading up to this final countdown and
Hmm.
doing the donation, but then afterwards they felt a kind of letdown. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes. Yeah. And that was my experience too, unfortunately, you know, in many ways. So we did the transplant, um, and I was in the hospital for one night before they asked me to leave the hospital because they needed my bed. You know, that was a shock and a surprise for me. You know, up until the donation and the transplant, there had been all this support. I had all these conversations with surgeons and specialists and psychologists and my donation coordinator. And then when the donation happened, it kind of felt like, you know, thank you for your kidney, and we'll see you later. You know, actually they wanted my bed so quickly, they actually helped me pack up my bags and they put me in a room at the end of the hallway and told me to call someone to come pick me up, you know, and that was the very next day after this transplant. So that did not feel good, you know. because I was expecting to be in the hospital for a couple of days at least, to make sure everything was operational and functioning well. They felt like I was fine to go home, so they kicked me out of sorts. They really did. They were like, off you go. And I was kind of left to my own devices to really figure out how I was going to recover and convalesce. And of course, they give you information, they give you booklets, and they have conversations with you before the transplant around what you can expect, and how to look after your wounds and your incisions. And but yeah, in terms of the support I received from the hospital after that, there was really not a lot. Yeah, a lot of information. I had to do a lot of research on myself, reaching out to other people who have gone through this process to learn, well, actually how, I have this booklet that says how it could impact my life, but how has it actually impacted your life? Those were really the connections and the information I was after. So I had to do some work to get that information. Yeah.
And we had like we had talked about being together when we're sick and stuff, but I was in the hospital several days longer than Kris was, obviously. So once I ended up being released, Kris and I ended up staying at my brother's house for a while, and that actually was good because we were both kind of sick, and it was kind of hard, to be sick. I think those first couple days were the worst because we weren't together. He couldn't get up to the hospital easily to see me. It was difficult. I wanted to get out of the hospital, but I was still all wired up and stuff. But also, like, once we were both like in quite a bit of pain as well. And I remember our first day. I remember our first day feeling well. We finally,
Oh yeah.
he
You
was
tell the story. You're good at it. Go ahead.
he was feeling well before me, but this one day he was able to drive and stuff, and it was my first day of being out and about in the car after getting better, and we're driving around, and this song came on the radio. I told you we had a song before, we had a song after too, but it was called Good to Be Alive by Andy Grammer.
Mhm.
And neither of us had ever heard of Andy Grammer. But oh my word, the words were like exactly our story, and it like just lifted our spirits, and we felt like, oh my goodness, like something really profound has happened. Like I have a second chance of life because of Kris. It was amazing. And so, yeah, we still play those on our anniversary and stuff. Yeah.
And it was the first song that came on the radio when we got in the car together.
Yeah.
Like we turned the car on, and it wasn't radio. We didn't put
It's
this
right at the
song on.
beginning of the
It,
song.
it's what was playing on the radio was the song "Good to Be Alive," and in brackets it's called "Good to Be Alive." Hallelujah. And my gosh, it really did just capture the moment, and it kind of became our post-transplant anthem, eh? Yeah.
It is really important to find those little blessings along the way, little things that help you get through it because it is so intense.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like the two of you had such a close bond beforehand that continued in your sharing of the recovery process and the celebrating afterwards.
Yeah, we only got closer. We're family for sure.
And
Um,
if I could add, like one of the other things that was really surprising and shocking to me is the reaction I received from people when they learned I was an organ donor. And it really did impact the ways I tell people that this is something that I've done. Because I feel like, I don't know, there must be this ulterior motive around why I would want to do something like that. I must be doing it to inflate my own ego or to make myself feel good about myself. And that isn't at all any of those emotions or those things I carried or processed in this procedure. And yeah, it does feel good to have, been able to do this. But at no point was making that decision to help Joanna inspired by my own motives or my own interest in inflating, you know, um, an idea or a thought about I had for myself. But the amount of times that is the reaction I receive from people is, "Oh, you must feel so good about yourself, or you must have done it so that you could tell people that you've done this." Um, and it's disappointing. It's honestly disappointing that that's the reaction some people have when you tell them. So it really is kind of an awareness for me that, although this amazing, miraculous experience happened, and I want to tell people about it, I want to share the importance of organ donation and how living organ donation can impact the lives of not only a recipient, but so many other people around you, that I really need to be mindful around who I share that information with, because I don't want people to respond to me um, in such a way where they're thinking I did it for my own selfish reasons. And I know that that's not unique to myself. I've connected with other organ donors, and that's also something that's come up for them too. Is that, there's some kind of motive behind their decision to do this. And I don't get it. I don't understand why that's the thought that some people have when they hear that I'm an organ donor. But it is something that, we have to navigate and talk about.
Mhm. I can see someone has put a comment in the chat. So I'll maybe ask the question if Joanna, if you feel like answering this, someone is asking, what was your GFR by the time you had your transplant? Or do you even remember?
No, I actually don't. Like, it was pretty close call. Like if it was canceled, I would have had to go on dialysis for sure. Um, but yeah, I was kind of sick enough that a lot of those days I don't remember, to be honest. It was like everybody around me was kind of like, what are they waiting for? Like, how long can this be? It's really quite shocking how long you can live. Like, I was pretty slow, and yeah, um, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't remember the number.
Oh, and this person is saying her husband's GFR is 9 right now, and his surgery is in 7 days. Congratulations to him, and I hope everything goes well. That's exciting.
That's very exciting. And I'm also just reading the chat, Joanna. You'd be curious to know that someone also had a song, Bon Jovi, "It's My Life."
Oh,
That
that's
was
a good one.
Louise's song.
That's a very
I love it. It's the things, and that's what we really hold on to. We come back and, you're going to hear that song, and you're going to, like, when I hear our songs, I really relate them to this remarkable, amazing experience that we were able to share together. So, Louise, I'm so happy that you have your song too.
that's fun.
Louisa is one of our we call her the Energizer Bunny. She is one of our greatest volunteers. She's our Montreal coordinator and walk coordinator, and she's had her life-saving transplants and is doing amazing.
Mm. That's remarkable. Congratulations.
Um, Before we move on and talk a little bit about advocacy work, Joanna, I think sometimes when I'm doing awareness about organ donation, when I think the things that's maybe overlooked or not taken into consideration by people who don't know anything about kidney disease or kidney failure, what has having a new kidney meant for your life since the transplant?
Mhm. Well, I kind of didn't know what to expect. Like, I was hoping to just be better and get on with life, you know? And the amazing thing is that Kris's kidney is like been awesome. Like it's really, I've not had any rejection episodes or any major problems with his kidney, which is awesome. It's really great. And everybody would say that that's majorly successful. That being said, it's my life is not what it was before I was sick, for sure. Because I have PKD, and I had such a huge incision. I had my entire abdomen cut. A lot of transplants are just the scope and can be a small one, but because I had my original kidneys removed, I had a very large incision, and actually nobody told me that your tissues actually are weaker as somebody with PKD. None of the doctors told me that. So I ended up getting a surgical hernia, several of them actually, but my first surgical hernia was 3 months. I had to have surgery 3 months after my transplant. And it was really big to go. It was a setback because another big surgery right after was hard. And then a year after that, it opened again. I had to have another surgery. And a year and a few months after that, it opened again. So I had an awful lot of, yeah, painful, hard medical stuff. And as you know, being on all the big medications, I've had infections and other things going on. And I have a polycystic liver as well. So right now I'm actually going through a lot of stuff trying to figure out what to do about my liver. So it's not all roses, but it's pretty amazing because I was preemptive surgery. I wasn't on dialysis. And I feel for the people that have had to be on that. And also, yeah, right now I'm on sick leave, which is a bummer because I love what I do. But I'm alive and I have really good days as well. And I am so blessed and so thankful, but it is a journey for sure. It's not just, even a successful transplant isn't all easy. I do know that some people are able to like just go back to work and live their life for quite a while. Yeah, that's not my story.
Thank you for sharing that part. Well, why don't we shift a little bit towards advocacy work? So there are, in a lot of provinces across the country, barriers to donating and barriers to getting a donation, getting a transplant. I know that, Kris, through your work that you've been doing in the Maritimes, you've come across several barriers to organ donation and transplant. Do you want to talk a little bit about those, your experience with those in the Maritimes, and maybe some of the positive news that you've had recently about changes in direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so for many of you who may be aware, but for some who may not be, Nova Scotia is the first jurisdiction I'm aware of in North America that moved to an implied consent model. Um, so what that means is you're an organ donor unless you opt out. So rather than an opt-in model, which was the standard, we have navigated to an opt-out system. But it's not perfect, you know. And some issues that are in front of us today in Nova Scotia is that, you know, in Nova Scotia, we support all the maritime provinces. So if you need a transplant and you're New Brunswick based, PEI based, or if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, you come to Nova Scotia and you're impacted by Nova Scotia law. You know, so there's some learnings that have happened that we've discovered, some inequalities and systemic barriers in front of that. Um, so some of those things is that, you know, if you need a lung transplant and you're maritime based, you can't get it in Nova Scotia. We don't do lung transplants in Nova Scotia, so you need to go to Toronto, you know. um, and that is a huge issue for a lot of people who can't financially afford to go to Toronto. If you're on a wait list for a long, you need to move there effectively, you know, because you need to be there in case you get the phone call saying you're ready. You need to be prepared for your tests. You need to do post transplant follow up. So if you're maritime based and you need lungs, you have to relocate, and that's at your own cost. There's not a lot of funding available for that right now. You know, recent estimates say that that's upwards of $40,000 out of pocket expense for people who need a lung transplant. We don't do living liver donations in Nova Scotia, you know, and we are the transplant hub for the Maritimes. So that's another systemic barrier because we can't do living liver donations. It's not an option for us out here. You know, we only do whole liver donations, and that comes from deceased donors. So if you're someone who wants to donate partial liver, not available to you in the Maritimes, you have to relocate. So those are some other issues that we're working on, trying to navigate and fix. We're having conversations with legislators, with lawmakers, with the government in Nova Scotia, around some of those supports we do need to have in the province. Um, so there's a shortage of transplant surgeons leading to missed opportunities. That's another barrier that's in front of us in the Maritimes. In 2023, the province of New Brunswick announced that they were also moving forward with an implied consent model. And that law is hopefully coming into effect in 2025. But what they've done is they've named that law Avery's Law. And that law was named after Avery Astle, who was a 16-year-old boy who unfortunately passed in a car accident. But his organs went to waste because there wasn't a donation team available to retrieve his organs. So how many people are there in the Maritimes and parts of Canada who are waiting for these life-saving organs, and they're there and they're well and they're healthy, but they can't be used because there's no procedures or processes in place so that they can be retrieved and used for transplant. Um, it's it's wasteful. It's, for me, it's sinful, and it's something that could be changed and should be changed. It needs to be changed. You know, we shouldn't be having organs going to waste when we have such a huge wait list for them. So those are some of the things that are in front of us out here in the Maritimes. Another issue is access to primary healthcare. If you go to the multi-organ transplant program's website, you're going to see one of the criteria is to become a living kidney donor is you must have a family physician. There's how many people in this country don't have a family physician, you know? In Nova Scotia alone, that number is about 10% of the population. We're close to 100,000 people in Nova Scotia without a primary care physician. So automatically, we're disqualifying 100,000 people for being able to proceed with living organ donation because they don't have someone to follow them. Now, there's information on that front, you know, aware of this need and aware that there's changes that need to happen. We did reach out to the government of Nova Scotia and requested a meeting with them so that we could bring up some of these issues. And in one of those meetings, they did inform us that they are looking into that. You know, they're looking into a process where if someone wants to step forward to become a living donor and they don't have a family doctor following them, that they will support that living donor to access a primary healthcare physician. Um, but that information is still not available. They're not sharing that information anywhere. It's not been updated on their website. You know, so if I'm sitting here wondering if I can donate a kidney and I go to the source, you know, the multi-organ transplant program, and I'm reading a list of criteria, It's not reflective of actual practice, So why would I proceed in wanting to donate if I didn't have a doctor? Because the information right there in front of me says I'm not eligible anyways. And we're learning that's not the truth. I could be eligible, so that's a systemic barrier. That's something we're hoping to change. We've asked them to change that and update their website with that information. But I checked this morning and it still hasn't been updated. So, you know, um, so when we say Nova Scotia, we are pioneers in the Organ and Tissue Donation Act, but there's still so many barriers in front of us that we need to address. We need to get on top of to make organ donation accessible to as many people as possible. Another barrier that's in front of us is that in Nova Scotia specifically, and this is true for many other provinces in Canada, that, while Health Canada has a set of criteria around organ and tissue donation, there are many provinces that have reciprocal programs with the United States, and that allows for organ exchanges to happen across borders. So in Nova Scotia, although we have Canadian standards, we follow the American standards so that those programs can remain in place. And the American standards are a little bit more stringent than the Canadian ones. And I only really became aware of this is because a friend of mine who was gay passed away, and he had cancer. So unfortunately for him, many of his organs would have been deemed ineligible for transplant. But there would have been other things available that he could have done. He could have donated tissue. He could have donated cornea. But the sole reason for his deferment was because he was gay. And he was categorized as a high-risk donor. And if you're a gay man, you don't proceed through that process of being considered for organ donation if you're a deceased donor. And the reasons for that is because the questions that they would need to ask your loved ones are considered discriminatory. So they don't want to proceed in asking your family members history about your sexual behavior or your activities. So they just don't proceed in pushing you through the process. So those organs go to waste. Living donation is a little different. You can go through a process called exceptional distribution. But even then, that's all rooted in science and information from the 80s, when HIV was a huge issue amongst that community. I myself am a gay man. I'm married to a man. So this impacts me personally also. I hadn't been in a male to male relationship at the time. I donated a kidney to Joanna, so we were able to proceed through that transplant because at that time that wasn't my lifestyle. But I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that that was something I was interested in for myself. And it's really painful to know that there are barriers in front of me that would prohibit me from being able to donate an organ to my husband if he ever needed one. You know, it's rooted in outdated information. And through this process, we've learned a lot of information. So if you were a deceased donor and you were a gay man, you were not, your organs were never tested. You never proceeded through the next step. You were considered high risk and you were refused the opportunity to donate. We've been made aware that the province of Nova Scotia has made a request for a variation from the American Tissue Bank so that gay men can proceed with donation. Procedure and practice has been 5 years of abstinence in Nova Scotia for a gay man to be considered eligible to donate. The variation allowed for 1 year. So it's now moved down to 1 year. But that's still, in my mind, ridiculous. I am a married man in a monogamous relationship, and I can't donate because I'm married to a man. It's discriminatory and it's really disappointing. Hi.
That has changed for blood donors recently, right?
It has changed for blood donors. Yeah.
But not
So
yet for
Yeah, exactly. So the Canadian Blood Services moved towards behavioral-based screening programs. So they got rid of the men who have sex with men prohibition. There used to be an abstinence procedure in place for that too, and now it's behavior-based screening. But that is not the practice for organ and tissue donation. So we've been made aware that there are some changes that Health Canada is proposing. So what they're wanting to move forward with is nucleic acid testing for all donors. So regardless of your orientation, your sexual behavior, if you're a living donor or if you're a deceased donor, they want to put all organs through a nucleic acid test. And what that test does is it detects HIV, HBV, and HCV. Currently, only deceased donors go through that. But again, if you're a gay man, you don't even go through that. You're just automatically excluded from being able to donate. Um, it is important to note that mandatory NAT testing for decreased tissue donors has been in effect since 2013. But because of the discriminatory screening questions, the risk assessment criteria, that tissue specialists have to ask the donors, the family, the spouse, a man had before never been approved to proceed through donation. Health Canada, and I'm sorry, I'm just reading a little note I have here. Health Canada has announced their intention to get rid of the men who have sex with men criterion for donor risk assessments and are proposing moving toward gender neutral behavioral screening. So for further context, the donor risk assessment criteria, they're set by a committee within the Canadian Standards Association. And that's in a document called Annex E, which is an appended document to the CSA standards that regulate organ and tissue donation in Canada. So decisions about the context of Annex E, which is the criteria that makes someone an increased infection risk donor and excludes them from tissue donation, they're made by a separate organization from Health Canada, even though the two work together. So these new proposed criteria are available for public review right now, and people can read them and provide feedback directly until the 10th of May. So because Health Canada is actively seeking public input around changes in criteria, you can provide your feedback now. And you can do that by visiting the CSA website, finding those documentations and providing your input. And that's new. This is new. For the longest time, it was a barrier to organ donation. And actually, my friend who passed away and was unable to donate, it's his family. They launched a human rights complaint, and it went. They were trying to get it before a tribunal. Unfortunately, the tribunal denied to hear their case. But I'm really hopeful that change can happen there because it's rooted in outdated science. And we have information today, technology today, testing and screening processes we could implement that would really allow a whole population of people in Canada to proceed through organ donation that can't currently, turn it into a behavioral-based screening process. And those are some of the advocacy pieces that we're working on here in Nova Scotia right now. Yeah. Quickly, another barrier that we've been made aware of is that my colleague, her name is Sylvie. She used to be the president of the Kidney Foundation of Canada. She is now the director of the Canadian Transplant Association in Quebec. She shared recently in a meeting that they're also being made aware of issues living donors are facing with regards to getting travel and life insurance. And we're aware that going through the testing of being an organ donor might reveal, information about your health that you might otherwise be unaware of. And that is a risk involved in going through these extensive tests. You might find out something about you that you didn't know. And finding out that information gives you a pre-existing condition, which might make you ineligible for certain coverage. But organ donation, living organ donation, should not be something that impacts your ability to access life and health insurance. And that is a reality for some people we're learning. So I know Sylvie is really spearheading an initiative, an effort to get the law changed, where if you want to step forward as a living donor, it will not impact your rates or your capacity to get travel, life, or health insurance.
Thanks so much, Kris, for sharing all of those issues.
Yes, Louisa, that is correct, Sylvie. You know her.
We have a bit of time now, and if people have any questions, I'd love to open it up. There have been a few things popped in the comments. I'll just share a couple of them. Someone's asking, how long is the wait list for a kidney in the Maritimes? I'm assuming for O positive. That may not be something that you know, Kris, but
Specifically, no, I'm not aware. Since we did implied consent, what I do know is that organ donation has increased almost 100%. We're doing twice as many transplants as we did before we moved to the implied consent model. Someone on my board recently received a kidney, and they were on the transplant for the list for a year and a half. And that, from what I'm hearing from others, is about the new normal in Nova Scotia, about a year and a half for a kidney transplant.
another question someone has asked is, are there any documents or resources that could be provided after this webinar if people wanted more information about any of the barriers that you've suggested? And we can easily send an email to all the registrants. So Kris, if there is any information that you have that's easily accessible, we'd be happy to share that.
Absolutely. Yep. I'll send that to you.
Awesome. Someone's saying, with the implied consent, if there's no transplant surgeon immediately available, those organs from a deceased person would just go to waste. Does this happen often?
So my understanding is yes. If there's no transplant team readily available to source the organs, they don't get used. And that is something we're working on. That is what Avery's Law is about in New Brunswick. That's where Avery's Law comes from. I'm not familiar with how often it happens. I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but it is happening, and it shouldn't be happening. So that's why we're having those conversations. That's why these changes need to happen.
Someone else is asking, can someone in BC be on the wait list there, or one needs to be living there? Maybe that person, if you want to clarify what you're asking there. I'm not sure if you're meaning a donor or someone who
Can
is
someone in
looking.
BC be on the wait list in Nova Scotia? Is that
Oh,
what you mean? No, my understanding is no. You go on the wait list in the province you are residing. Yeah.
Louisa has dropped into the comments that she'll be meeting Sylvie on Thursday because there's an organ donation day at a local hospital where she'll be doing some awareness raising.
Oh, please say hello to her for me. I got to spend some time with Sylvie in Ottawa last year. She's a wonderful person. Sylvie donated a kidney to her son. Yeah.
Someone's asking, does anyone know if implied consent is coming to Ontario?
I've heard no news on that front. It should, and one of the things that we have recognized in the province, and this is from physicians and doctors, is that while donation has increased in Nova Scotia, they're not really sure if it's a direct result of the law that has moved towards implied consent, or in drafting the law, they had to review all the systems in place around organ donation. They had to do a complete overhaul and review to get the law to be where it needed to be to support the systems, to get the systems in place where they need to be to support the new law. And they believe it's because they did that systemic change in review that also had a massive impact in increasing the capacity to proceed through organ donation. So it might not even necessarily be that the implied consent has had that huge impact, but it's the huge overhaul that needed to take place to get the systems in line with the law that many physicians and doctors feel helped increase the rate of donation in the province.
Absolutely. Someone, Louise is saying she hears that Alberta is working on something regarding organ donation and the opt-out consent.
Oh, that's exciting. I don't have any information about Alberta, but I hope they do, you know.
For people who are listening, watching, and who will be watching this video in the future, if organ transplant and donation advocacy is something that they feel really strongly about, what would be some ways that you might suggest, either Kris or Joanna, to get involved and if you're wanting to be part of making a positive change on issues like the ones that you've talked about, Kris?
Mhm. Well, I'll speak from my experience. There's a lot of opportunity to get involved and to put power behind your voice. I got involved with the Canadian Transplant Association, and it was through my involvement with them that we were able to get the platform needed to engage with our local government. Um, Fortunately for myself, my local MLA, MPP, I think they're called in Ontario, is the Minister of Health. And she actually runs an office above my business. So I've been able to reach out to her directly to establish these meetings and to get some of these conversations going, which is unique to me, and really fortunate for us that we've been able to, really take advantage of that relationship with her. Um, there are a lot of advocacy organizations in Ontario. There's TAP, across Canada. TAP is do you remember what it's called?
Transplant Ambassador Program.
Transplant Ambassador Program. For some reason, the name was escaping me. There's the Kidney Foundation of Canada, and in each province there is a provincial division of the Kidney Foundation you can get involved in and outreach. There's the Polycystic Kidney Disease Foundation of Canada. There are a lot of other organizations that work on advocacy. But a lot of these organizations need your voice. They need people to be talking with their local members of parliament. They need people to be talking with physicians and medical specialists and decision makers. If we're a silent group, people don't know change needs to happen. So we do that by speaking, by sharing, by advocating, by reaching out. So, the Canadian Transplant Association, we have chapters all across Canada. I recommend that you find an organization that aligns with your interests and values and reach out to them to see how you can get involved.
And I'm just pulling up. I don't see any other, someone has mentioned in the comments, the Kidney Patient and Donor Alliance of Canada, which is also doing advocacy work for, especially for recipients. But one question that someone had put when they registered, they had shared with us when they registered, is, do you ever have the sense that medical personnel might be discouraging people from transplants? And that may not be something that you're aware of in the work that either of you are doing, but they said in their process, a number of doctors discouraged them from seeking a transplant, from the living donor process, and what are some things that could be done with the healthcare providers to help change that attitude towards transplant, especially living donation?
Wow. Well, I'm really sorry that that is the experience that that person had. I think that's really unfortunate. Um, uh, I guess my encouragement would be to, get them to do their research. There's so much information and materials out there that support the benefits of organ donation. I guess my understanding would be, why are they discouraging from proceeding through that process? I know that if you're on dialysis, if you're needing a kidney transplant, many medical professionals will encourage you to stay on your kidneys as long as you can. you know, they want you to remain on your kidneys until the very last possible moment. And what that helps is it ensures that when you receive your new kidney, it'll also last as long as it can for you. Um, so I imagine that perhaps, they're waiting for something like that to happen in this unique circumstance. But I've not been aware of any medical professionals who have challenged the idea of organ donation being a solution. So
I
I'm
think,
sorry that's your experience.
Go
yeah,
ahead,
it's
Joanna.
kind of, that's a brutal scenario.
Mm,
But I would say if they're not telling you why, like you're not a good candidate, like, is it something medically going on? They think the risks are too high, these kind of things. If they're not explaining why they're doing such a thing, then I think I would probably seek out like the medical advocates at the hospital, because there are advocates, patient advocates that you can talk to, or social workers at the hospital that might have a little more uh you can have some help to advocate for yourself. Um or yeah, I would probably go that way. I don't know.
mhm,
Sounds hard. I think most medical professionals should be doing everything they can to advocate for us as well. It's
mhm.
it's
It's the
a
first time I've ever been asked that question. I've never heard of a medical professional discouraging organ transplant, especially if there's a need. If obviously if the medical professional thinks you can wait, or they don't think that in your journey transplant is the path in front of you at this moment, then there's just cause in that. But if you're in need of a transplant because you need one, I don't understand why not proceeding.
keep pushing.
Hmm? Keep pushing. Fight for your rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we finish for the evening, Joanna or Kris, is there anything else that you would like to add to what we've talked about tonight?
I would just like to thank you for the opportunity. I think it's just really important to tell our stories and encourage each other to make these policy changes and stuff. I mean, it's an incredible process, and yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think, or for me, organ donation, I was telling Joanna this, there's not a lot of logic in making the decision to have a body part of yours removed. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a really unnatural decision to make. Um, it's a really big emotional decision, you know. So I think it's really important that if you're considering being a living organ donor, you have, I don't know, like, you have that emotional, I think for sure you need that emotional maturity to be aware that, this decision you're making isn't really logical, but for me, it always felt like the right thing to do. Um, so it was really like rooted in what felt like the right thing, what felt like the best course of action. Yeah, I
Same.
don't know if that's really helpful, but it was an emotional choice. You told me you needed a kidney. I made that decision right there. You're going to get a kidney. If I can do it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but there's just not a lot of logic in that choice, to say, here's a body part of mine, take it, but I would really encourage people to look into those options if you're seeking a donor, recognize that for many it's not going to be a logical choice for them. It's going to be something that they need to choose, because there's emotional connection, because really that's, for me, at least in my story, where that decision was made. Um, and I would encourage people to sign up to be an organ donor. In Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, it's implied. But in other parts of Canada, it's not, and I see right in front of me the impact organ donation can have. So please do sign up to be an organ donor. You might just end up saving someone's life.
So much. Well, thanks to both Kris Woods and Joanna MacLeod for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate you sharing your personal stories. And Kris, I also appreciate you sharing some of the advocacy work that you're doing in the Maritimes to try and remove some of these barriers to being a living organ donor. I also want to thank several people have shared a little piece of their own personal kidney journey or transplant journey in the chat throughout the night. And if we haven't mentioned you, I just want to thank all of you for sharing your own personal experiences. And I'll let everyone know the video of this session will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. All the registrants will receive an email the next day or two as a follow-up with some of the links and resources that we've talked about sharing. And then we'll also send out an email once the video is available. If you have any additional questions that you would like us to ask, either Joanna or Kris, or any other people interested in supporting people with kidney disease, please feel free to email us anytime at endpkd@npkd.ca. And I've put that link in the chat. So thank you everyone for being here with us today, and have a very good night.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.